Television screens flickered with heavy static. The live broadcast cut through the interference. Across Romania, citizens watched their dictator fall. The final days of the Cold War delivered a rapid conclusion to more than 2 decades of unbroken power. Nicolae Ceaușescu ruled the entire nation through constant suspicion and forced silence. Now, the government dissolved in front of millions of viewers. The cameras kept recording. The dictator, collapsing on live television, started his reign with international applause. He became General Secretary on March 22, 1965. Western leaders praised his defiance, unaware it masked a domestic demographic trap. In August 1968, Nicolae Ceaușescu publicly denounced the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia. Washington and Paris saw a rebel breaking from Moscow, rewarding him with lucrative trade deals and financial loans. Behind this reformist facade, the state needed a larger workforce. Romania held roughly 19 million people. The government wanted more. In 1966, Ceaușescu signed a strict decree outlawing both abortion and contraception. The policy targeted millions of families overnight. State control shifted from political rhetoric directly to the bodies of citizens. Western funds continued flowing in exchange for independence, while factory floors became medical checkpoints. Authorities mandated forced gynecological exams at workplaces to track pregnancies. The state monitored menstrual cycles. Doctors reported every anomaly to the secret police. Finally, officials imposed direct financial fines on women failing to reproduce. Demographic fines demanded a new ideological foundation. Elena Petrescu stepped from a basic chemistry lab directly onto state podiums. But the methods for this control arrived from Asia. In 1971, Nicolae Ceaușescu visited China and North Korea. He studied the tactics of Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung. He watched millions of citizens moving on command. He returned to Bucharest and issued the July Theses. Censors purged the press. The party seized direct control over all cultural expression. The state required a matriarch. Elena joined the Central Committee in 1972. National television framed the uneducated chemist as the undisputed savior of the Romanian people. Indoctrination targeted the youngest generation. First graders stood in cold classrooms. They chanted rhythmic verses praising the couple in loud, synchronized choruses. Local officials renamed public streets in their honor. Loyalty to the family became the only condition for political survival. 400,000 informants. The regime secured its ideological devotion through genuine physical fear. The state outsourced this terror directly to the Securitate. By 1977, the secret police employed 11,000 full-time officers. Their true power lay in the shadow network. With a national population of 21 million, 400,000 informants meant roughly 1 in every 50 citizens was watching. Trust evaporated instantly. Colleagues tracked colleagues at work. Neighbors monitored neighbors, and husbands began doubting their own wives. People stopped speaking aloud inside their apartments. They wrote notes on scraps of paper and burned them in glass ashtrays. The paranoia was not imagined. Picking up a telephone receiver often came with a distinct, hollow click. The line was active. The Securitate detained suspects without trial, applied psychological pressure, and erased vocal critics from public life. Control extended far beyond domestic borders. Contact with the outside world triggered immediate suspicion. Agents intercepted every single piece of international mail. An officer steamed open an envelope arriving from a relative abroad. They extracted the handwritten pages. Then they copied the intercepted letters. While intercepted envelopes piled up on state security desks, the domestic cultural sphere faced a planned sterilization. How do you mentally isolate 21 million citizens? You pull the plug on the national television broadcast and rewrite the cultural baseline. State censors moved methodically through every layer of daily entertainment and personal faith. Public playlists dropped tracks by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, while libraries purged their archives of foreign literature. The government recognized that physical isolation required an ideological vacuum to survive. Bulldozers targeted historical churches across the residential neighborhoods of Bucharest to make room for new administrative centers. This organized demolition cleared physical space for concrete avenues, but it also erased the last pockets of religious influence. By the late 1970s, the national television grid offered just 2 hours of daily programming. Almost half of that allocated airtime featured Nicolae Ceaușescu, delivering prolonged political speeches to the nation. The printing presses across the country operated under identical constraints. Daily newspapers printed exclusively state reports. The erasure of information spilled from censored pages onto the physical streets of Bucharest. Bulldozers tore through ancient gravestones, flattening historic cemeteries into dust. The government launched a systematization program. State agents kicked open private doors without warning. Panicked families grabbed their belongings and ran. Cold concrete blocks replaced centuries-old villages. Soon, the roar of collapsing brickwork echoed across the capital. In 1977, the dictator ordered the Palace of the Parliament. 7 square kilometers of old neighborhoods vanished. This scale of demolition equaled wiping out the entire historic center of an average European city. Builders lined the interior with imported marble, while hungry citizens scoured empty markets for basic rations. The sudden wave of evictions displaced exactly 40,000. $10 billion. That was the invoice for the imported marble and the decade of industrial expansion. The regime had borrowed heavily throughout the 1970s. Western countries, the IMF, and the World Bank funded the grand vision. But by the early 1980s, global oil shocks and failing factories left the treasury empty. Creditors demanded their money. In 1982, Bucharest announced a national policy to eliminate the entire foreign debt. The solution targeted the caloric intake of 22 million citizens. $10 billion of external debt required exporting nearly everything the agricultural sector produced. The extraction moved rapidly. State trucks arrived at collective farms before dawn. Foremen loaded the entire yield of wheat and vegetables directly into freight cars. Trains departed straight for foreign markets. Black Sea ports operated around the clock to load the cargo ships. The domestic supply chain vanished overnight. Supermarkets turned into hollow concrete halls, while rural areas suffered the immediate blow. Villages received weekly deliveries that barely kept people alive. The government imposed strict rationing. Meat, eggs, sugar, and flour disappeared from regular distribution. Urban residents received standard ration cards. These printed slips guaranteed nothing. People formed long lines outside empty stores in the pitch black. Legs grew numb against the freezing pavement. The physical exhaustion of a daily 6 to 8 hour queue paralyzed the body. Citizens shifted their weight in the freezing fog, waiting hours to buy a few potatoes. The state shipped harvested food across the border to satisfy foreign creditors, simultaneously severing the flow of basic heating for the citizens left behind. The electrical grid, initially constructed to drive an ambitious national industrial leap, now remained disconnected from residential blocks for 22 hours a day. Beginning in 1982, central directives enforced strict limits on domestic energy consumption. Elevators halted in high-rise concrete buildings. The government permitted only 40-watt light bulbs in private apartments. A 40-watt filament provides just enough dim yellow light to read a newspaper, but it generates zero thermal energy to warm freezing concrete walls. Indoor temperatures plummeted well below zero during the long winter months. This engineered deprivation swiftly invaded the operating rooms. State hospitals lost access to functioning sterilization equipment, clean bed sheets, and basic chemical anesthetics. Surgeons secured patients directly to the operating tables. Nurses handed over worn instruments under the fading glow of unreliable emergency lamps. Scalpels sliced into fully conscious patients. Malnutrition weakened a generation of pregnant women trapped in freezing, unlit flats. The biological toll of debt repayment physically fractured the population. By 1985, The nation recorded 26 infant deaths per 1,000 live births. While hospital wards froze, the state's foreign debt actually shrank. The strategy worked on paper, yet the country was physically dying to fund it. Ceaușescu and Elena felt nothing of this crisis. Fresh fruit and imported meat arrived at their heavily guarded residences daily. Special stores provided high-ranking officials with modern appliances and luxury food. Elite villas maintained full heating through the winter. Just outside their walls, the national infrastructure crumbled into dark ruins. By 1985, half of Romania's $10 billion external debt vanished. Ceaușescu forced the complete exhaustion of human capital to achieve what he called national independence. The state ledger looked flawless. The nation could not endure. 500,000 Securitate informants monitored 22 million citizens. The flawless ledger came at the price of constant paranoia. Fear drove all political dissent into cramped residential kitchens. Families turned on metal sink faucets. The steady rush of cold water masked terrified whispers from potential listening devices hidden in the walls. People locked their doors and tuned shortwave radio sets to the Voice of America or the BBC Romanian service. Radio Free Europe broadcasted its signal directly from Munich headquarters. The transmitters reached millions of isolated listeners across the Eastern Bloc. Within a few short years, these exact illegal broadcast frequencies would coordinate armed street battles. But for now, the local resistance operated in deep shadows. University students and intellectuals typed samizdat pages through the night. They documented the hidden reality. Cameras clicked silently inside freezing, half-empty hospital wards. The lenses captured the hollow faces of starving children. Couriers folded the undeveloped film rolls into their clothing and crossed heavily guarded borders. Foreign correspondents developed the smuggled negatives and printed the stark evidence across Western front pages. While stark negatives of hospitals reached Western front pages, control inside the government consolidated under one person. Elena Ceaușescu dictated policy to veteran engineers and silenced university professors. State television celebrated her as a scientist of world renown. Her actual academic portfolio consisted of fraudulent diplomas. She left school at age 14. Earning dozens of scientific doctorates was physically impossible. By 1987, she captured top state posts. Elena became deputy prime minister. She seized leadership within the Academy of Sciences. The regime branded her the mother of the nation. These were not empty titles. She commanded science ministries without any background, forcing officials to execute unscientific directives. Expertise lost all value. She regularly humiliated department heads. Competent specialists and experienced administrators abandoned the state apparatus to avoid her demands for blind obedience. The ongoing purge of specialized ministries coincided with a total collapse in heavy manufacturing. Protesting workers surged through the doors of the Communist Party headquarters to overwhelm the guards. By November 1987, the anger had erupted at the Stagul Rosu truck factory and the Tractorul plant. Brațov operated as a primary industrial hub, making this walkout a direct threat to the regime. Men demanding basic food began dismantling the inner offices. Glass shattered across the pavement as rioters threw framed party portraits directly out of the headquarters windows. The loud tearing of paper posters echoed over the gathering crowd. Army units quickly surrounded the city limits to suppress the physical destruction of state property. The state exiled more than 60 organizers into strict isolation without any trial. 2 years after the Brașov lockdown, tension finally fractured the western border. A routine eviction of a single parish priest triggered the sudden collapse of a 40-year dictatorship. In December 1989, state authorities arrived in Timișoara. Their target was Laszlo Tőkés. The ethnic Hungarian pastor openly criticized the state's control over religion. On December 15th, officers approached the building to remove him. They found the main entrance blocked. Parishioners stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold. They formed a tight human chain, sealing the church doors with their own bodies. The freezing December air carried a sound unheard for decades. Open protest shouts echoed across the square. Timișoara sat just 50 kilometers from the frontier. Residents built homemade antennas to catch Hungarian television broadcasts. This geographic loophole shattered the state information monopoly. Citizens knew exactly what happened across the rest of Eastern Europe. Word of the local standoff spread rapidly through the city of 300,000. By December 16th, the crowd swelled from dozens to hundreds and then thousands. Ordinary citizens joined the religious congregation. They shouted anti-government slogans. Protesters shattered windows and pushed directly into state administration offices. The localized dispute grew into a national rebellion. The regime declared martial law to contain the protests. Elite Securitate units and heavy army columns deployed directly onto the city streets. Hundreds of main battle tanks rolled directly against unarmed citizens after protesters broke the initial police cordons. From a state visit in Tehran, Ceaușescu picked up the phone to deliver a single command. He authorized lethal force. On December 17th, the slaughter began. Soldiers fired live ammunition directly into the crowded city squares. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy over the streets, mingling with the violent rattle of tank tracks on the cobblestones. Men and women collapsed on the pavement. The state quickly moved to erase the evidence. Military trucks arrived under the cover of darkness. Soldiers loaded the corpses into the cargo beds. The dead vanished into unmarked graves dug outside the city limits, while families searched in vain. By December 18th, the toll stood at 93 documented deaths in just 48 hours. Over 300 wounded and detained citizens overflowed the local hospitals. 93 bodies in unmarked graves failed to halt the momentum, entirely shattering the information blockade enforced by the secret police. Workers launched a coordinated factory strike, shutting down the production lines, while the local military garrison finally lowered their service rifles. On December 20th, Timișoara formally declared itself the first free city liberated from communist rule. State authorities could no longer isolate the disaster within regional borders. Details of the mass shootings traveled through handwritten notes, secretly carried by passengers riding the morning commuter trains directly into the capital. Desperate to project an illusion of stability, the regime scheduled a mandatory public assembly for December 21st inside Palace Square. Officials forcibly moved tens of thousands of citizens using government buses, explicitly threatening immediate job termination for anyone missing from the crowd. To reclaim the image of national unity, on December 21st, the dictator stepped onto the Central Committee balcony. He looked down and began reading his speech, expecting the usual rhythmic applause. State television broadcast it live. Palace Square could hold over 100,000 people, turning the planned rally into a giant physical trap for the leadership itself. For 2 minutes, the masses maintained organized silence. Then, a single shout echoed from the back. It multiplied. The forced quiet broke, replaced by a rising, chaotic roar of boos. Ceaușescu froze mid-sentence. His hand hovered in the air. His face shifted from practiced confidence to pure panic. The television feed cut to a blank screen. Security forces flooded the area, deploying tear gas against the packed crowd. The afternoon gave way to violent night clashes. Thick smoke poured from the avenues. Students and factory workers merged into one moving front across the burning streets. The nocturnal clashes and urban haze fractured the state's apparatus of violence. Military units that aimed rifles at civilians hours before were now marching beside them. The turning point struck on December 22, 1989, following the sudden death of Defense Minister Vasile Milea. The government claimed suicide, but the army suspected assassination. Milea died in his office at the Central Committee building after refusing orders to escalate the crackdown. His abrupt death shattered any remaining loyalty to the administration. Armored personnel carriers rolled through the crowds with quiet turrets. Soldiers sitting on the steel armor started handing out bread rations to the protesters they had been ordered to suppress. The chain of command disintegrated. Field officers began issuing their own independent directives, bypassing the political leadership. They initiated the withdrawal of garrisons from Bucharest, instructing soldiers to avoid touching civilians. Heavy wooden doors of the Central Committee splintered under surging protesters. High above the chaos, helicopter blades aggressively sliced the freezing air. The illusion of total state control had shattered an hour earlier. Around 11 in the morning, Nicolae Ceaușescu attempted one final televised address. A deafening roar from the square below completely drowned out his trembling voice. Old security protocols simply evaporated. The former ruler was now desperately fleeing his own captured capital. Shortly after 12, the dictator rushed aboard the waiting transport. Colonel Vasile Malitsin lifted the aircraft directly off the concrete roof. He initially directed the flight path toward the Snagov military base. Yet the skies offered no sanctuary. The Supreme Commander instantly became a prime target within his own sovereign airspace. Romanian ground forces actively deployed Soviet Strela II portable surface-to-air missiles. To avoid immediate radar detection, Malitsin dropped the machine to an ultra-low altitude. He navigated close to the terrain. This frantic escape flight lasted barely 15 minutes. Fearing rebel fire and shifting loyalties, the pilot suddenly faked a critical mechanical failure. He brought the heavy helicopter down in a barren field near Taitu. The landing site sat roughly 80 kilometers northwest of Bucharest. That landing broke the chain of command. The old security protocols vanished in the dirt. Nicolae Ceaușescu stood on a rural road. The former supreme leader of Romania was frantically waving at passing cars. A civilian driver stopped. He dropped the couple at a local agricultural research station. Workers recognized the dictator and called the local police. By the manual, these officers had to secure and protect the president. Instead, they arrested him on the spot. The state crumbled from the bottom up. Police transferred the prisoners to Unit 01417. This anti-aircraft artillery garrison sat on the outskirts of Târgoviște. Soldiers locked the couple inside a cramped officer's room. Thick blankets covered the windows entirely. The heavy fabric blocked the sunlight and severed all visual contact with the outside world. They still wore the same clothes from the escape. Nobody provided fresh garments. Food consisted of dry bread and weak tea. Guards stood at the door but received no clear orders. Power shifted in Bucharest. The National Salvation Front took control of the capital. The new leaders panicked. The provisional government feared that loyalist forces would launch an armed rescue operation. 55 minutes. This short time span defined the most consequential tribunal in Romanian history. Driven by the immediate threat of a military counterattack, the new government discarded any formal investigation to secure a legally binding execution. On December 25, 1989, a special court convened inside the Târgoviște garrison. The proceedings unfolded in a freezing barracks room, documented by one amateur video camera. Judge Gica Popa opened a hastily compiled dossier and read the capital charges aloud. The primary accusations centered on the genocide of 60,000 citizens, alongside the destruction of the national economy. A standard Romanian homicide trial required months of testimonies and forensic analysis. This military tribunal bypassed every established protocol to process a genocide charge in under an hour. Nicolae Ceaușescu refused to stand up, glaring at the makeshift wooden bench while rejecting the court's authority. He demanded the convocation of the Grand National Assembly, shouting that the officers possessed no jurisdiction. Elena Ceaușescu interrupted the prosecutors to lash out at the surrounding soldiers. The state-appointed defense attorneys offered only brief, formal remarks that effectively endorsed the prosecution. No witnesses were ever called to the stand, and no tangible evidence was brought forward. It took exactly 55 minutes to process 24 years of unchecked rule. The firing squad was already waiting in the snowy courtyard. The final death sentence was delivered on the 55th minute. At the 55th minute, the legal theater abruptly ended. The dictator's fate passed into the hands of 3 soldiers from the paratroopers regiment. By 1445, Captain Ionel Boeru raises his rifle before the firing command fully sounds. There are no blindfolds. Nicolae and Elena walk toward a courtyard wall already chipped by past military drills. The sub-zero December air bites at their faces. The paratroopers do not wait for a final confirmation. They pull the triggers. The crack of automatic fire fills the enclosed space. A thick smell of gunpowder chokes the freezing winter air. The standard Romanian PMMD-63 assault rifle cycles 600 shots per minute. 3 shooters, holding down their triggers for 30 seconds, unleash a storm of lead. The mass of incoming metal pushes the couple back against the concrete wall. They collapse into the blood-stained snow. The execution lasts less than 30 seconds. The physical damage is massive. The concentrated crossfire leaves the bodies unrecognizable, tearing at least 70 bullets through Nicolae alone, while dozens more strike Elena. The soldiers keep firing, even as the targets hit the ground. They make sure survival remains impossible. A military doctor quickly checks the remains. No religious rites take place, and the state notifies no family members. Within hours, troops transport the bodies across the city to Ghensi Cemetery. Soldiers load the shredded corpses into cheap, unmarked coffins. Hiding 2 wooden boxes at Ghensi Cemetery could not pacify a fractured country. The National Salvation Front had to provide visual proof that the dictator was erased. The most heavily censored television network in Europe suddenly prepared to broadcast the unedited death of its chief censor. Inside the studios, engineers scrambled to splice together the raw video of the tribunal and the courtyard aftermath. They worked frantically to prepare the tape for immediate distribution. At exactly 10 o'clock in the evening, state television under the control of the National Salvation Front pushed the grim spectacle into the public broadcast. Romania held a population of 23 million citizens, but the tape quickly escaped national borders. By the next morning, networks like the BBC, CNN, ZDF, and TF1 integrated the footage into their bulletins. Global syndication pushed the audience to 300 million viewers within 48 hours. For a ruler who held power since 1965, this televised humiliation was a direct political weapon. The broadcast proved to the population that armed resistance against the new government was futile. However, this rushed display of violence left lingering questions among the viewing public. A segment of the society openly doubted that the makeshift military tribunal held any legal validity. The broadcasted executions silenced the streets, but former party functionaries immediately seized the power vacuum. The very people who fought the regime in December found themselves under the clubs of a new government in June. In June 1990, thousands of miners from the Jiu Valley descended on Bucharest. They arrived on specially chartered trains. Wooden clubs cracked against the skulls of students in University Square. The National Salvation Front had summoned these workers to clear the capital. Hundreds of protesters were beaten into the pavement. The dictator was dead, yet the repressive tactics remained firmly in the hands of his former subordinates. Back in December, Communist Party offices had emptied overnight. Second-tier functionaries simply walked into the abandoned rooms and took the desks. Ion Iliescu assumed control of the country. He was a former Central Committee secretary, sidelined years earlier. Now, he positioned himself as a democratic reformer. The National Salvation Front consisted almost entirely of these veteran communist officials. They called national elections for May 20, 1990. Iliescu secured over 85% of the vote. The campaign was highly accelerated. Opposition parties had barely weeks to organize. Meanwhile, the front controlled the entire infrastructure and television networks. The new leadership promised accountability for the winter uprising. Dozens of military officers faced initial charges. But as the new government solidified its grip, the investigations stalled. Prosecutors encountered sudden political walls. Evidence vanished from state archives. Cases simply disappeared. The political maneuvers of June 1990 could not conceal a deeper truth. Ceaușescu had left behind empty government reserves, a ruined industrial base, and runaway inflation. The real cost of his 24-year rule was measured in human grief. Families in Timișoara walked slowly through municipal cemeteries, desperately searching for unmarked graves among thousands of fresh burials. Over 1,000 funerals took place in the early months of 1990. Cities like Cluj and Bucharest became landscapes of daily mourning. The bullet that killed the dictator did not repair the nation. His physical legacy still dominates the skyline of the capital. The Palace of the Parliament towers over Bucharest, casting a massive concrete shadow. It remains the second largest administrative building in the world. Constructed with 1 million cubic meters of marble, it represents a permanent financial debt forced upon future generations. Today, the scars of those winter days remain visible. Every year on December 22nd, the country pauses. A quiet voice reads lists of names aloud over the loudspeakers at Revolution Square. Families gather in the freezing cold. They light candles on the dark stone pavement.